For most of my life, I thought my mother was disappearing. Every evening, without fail, she would pull her chair to the window, fold her hands in her lap, and simply stop. No book, no television, no conversation, just the window, and whatever she saw in it that none of us could see. I used to stand in the doorway and watch her, and I remember feeling something between worry and frustration because I could not understand how a person could sit that still and call it living. My name is George. I am 75 years old, and it took me until now, until my own chair, my own window, my own evenings, to understand that my mother was not disappearing at all. She was doing the only honest thing left that she knew how to do. I grew up in a small house in the kind of town where everyone knew your name, but very few people knew your business. My mother was a practical woman, not cold, but contained. She raised 4 children, kept the house, cooked every meal, and moved through each day with a kind of quiet efficiency that I mistook for most of my childhood for contentment. She did not complain. She did not explain herself. She simply did what needed to be done and moved on to the next thing. And I think for a long time, that was enough for her. Or maybe it was never enough, and she simply never had the language for it. I am not sure I will ever know which one is true. My father worked long hours. He was a decent man, not unkind, but distracted in the way that men of his generation were permitted to be. The house was my mother's world, and she tended it carefully, and I think she found a real kind of pride in that for many years. But somewhere along the way, and I could not have told you when, not then, something in her quieted, not suddenly. It happened the way most things happen in a life, so gradually that by the time you notice it, it has already been true for a long time. The window habit started, as best I can remember, sometime after my youngest sister left for college. That would have put my mother in her late 50s. We were all grown by then, moving through our own lives, coming home for holidays and Sunday dinners, and then leaving again the way children do. The house that had once held 6 people now held 2. And then, after my father's first health scare, it held 1.5, if I am being honest about what he was by that point. And every evening, without fail, there was my mother in her chair at the window. I asked her about it once. I was in my 30s visiting for a weekend, and I sat down beside her and asked what she was looking at. She turned and looked at me for a moment in a way I could not quite read, and then she turned back to the window and said, "Nothing in particular." I thought that was the end of it. I thought she meant she was simply resting her eyes, letting her mind go blank the way tired people do. I went back to whatever I had been doing, and I did not ask again. It would be decades before I understood that nothing in particular was not an evasion. It was, in fact, the most precise answer she could have given me. There is something that happens to a person when the active portion of their life begins to wind down. I do not mean retirement exactly, though that is part of it. I mean the deeper winding down, the point at which you have done most of the things you are going to do, made most of the decisions you are going to make, and the future, which once felt like an open field you were walking toward, begins to feel more like a room you are already standing in. It is not a dramatic moment. Nobody announces it. You simply begin to notice in quiet ways that more of your life is behind you than ahead of you, and that the behind you is enormous, and that you carry all of it every single day in ways you were never fully aware of when you were young enough to keep moving fast enough not to feel the weight. My mother had carried a great deal. I know that now, in a way, I did not know it then. She had left her own family young, moved to a town where she knew no one, and built a life almost entirely from scratch around a man and children who needed her. She had set aside, I think, most of her own interior life for decades, not because anyone asked her to, not consciously, but because there was simply no space for it. You cannot tend to your own inner world when the outer world is constantly asking for your hands. And so she tended outward, always outward, until the day she no longer needed to. And by then, I think she had almost forgotten what was in there waiting. The window was where she went to find it again. I did not understand that then. What I understood then was the surface of it, the appearance of an old woman sitting still, and I interpreted that stillness through the lens of my own busy life, my own forward motion, and it looked to me like sadness or withdrawal or some early sign of mental decline. I brought it up with my siblings once. We stood in the kitchen after dinner, talking in low voices about whether she was all right, whether she was lonely, whether we should be doing something. I do not remember what we concluded, probably that she was fine, probably that we would keep an eye on it the way adult children do when they are not yet ready to sit with the harder question of what their parents carry inside lives they have never fully seen. She passed when I was 53, a stroke, relatively quick, which the doctors told us was merciful, and which I have chosen to believe. By the end, her world had shrunk considerably. She did not always know which decade she was in, but on the good days, the clear days, she was still herself. Still contained, still folding her hands, and if there was a window nearby, she would find it. I think about the last real conversation I had with her. Real meaning that she was fully present, fully herself. I had driven up to see her, and we sat together in the front room of the assisted living facility, and she asked me about my work and my children, and I answered, and then I asked her how she was, and she said she was fine, just fine, and we sat in silence for a while, and I noticed her eyes drift toward the window, and even then I did not ask. Even with everything I knew about how short time was, I did not ask. I do not know what I was afraid of hearing. Maybe I was afraid she would tell me something I did not know how to hold. I am 75 now. I live alone. My wife, Carol, passed 4 years ago, and my children are grown and scattered in the kind way that children scatter, with calls on Sundays and visits at Thanksgiving, and a genuine love that is, nevertheless, lived at a distance. The house is quiet most of the time. I have learned to live inside that quiet, to stop flinching from it, though it took longer than I would like to admit. And in the evenings, I sit by the window. I did not plan it. It was not a conscious decision I made in honor of my mother or in some attempt to understand her. It simply began happening the way most true things begin without announcement. The day's light would soften, the room would go that particular shade of gold that only happens in late afternoon, and I would find myself in the chair by the front window, looking out at the yard, the street, the neighbors, moving through their own evenings. And I would stay there, sometimes for an hour, without quite meaning to. And one evening, sitting there, I finally understood what I had been looking at all those years ago when I watched my mother at her window. I understood what she was doing. She was not looking at anything outside. She was looking at everything inside, all of it, all at once. The years she had lived, the people she had loved, the choices made and unmade, the versions of herself she had been and set aside and half forgotten. The window was simply the thing her eyes rested on, while her mind and her heart moved through the whole of it quietly without needing to explain or resolve or arrive anywhere in particular. She was not grieving in the way we usually mean that word. She was holding all of it, all at once, in the only way that is possible when you are old enough to have that much to hold. I do the same thing now. I sit and I let it all come. Carol's laugh, the particular way she said my name when she was about to disagree with me. My father's hands, my children as small as they used to be, running through a yard that no longer exists. Old friends, some gone, some simply lost to the slow drift of different lives. Decisions I made with certainty that I would revisit differently now. Moments of real joy that I did not recognize as extraordinary until I was standing far enough away from them to see their shape. I let all of it come, and I hold it, and I do not try to do anything with it. That is the thing I could not have understood when I was younger. I would have needed it to go somewhere, to produce something. An insight, a resolution, a lesson, but that is not what it is. It is not a problem to solve. It is simply a life, and you are sitting with it, and that, in the end, is its own kind of completion. I wish I had asked my mother what she was thinking about on those evenings, not because I needed her to explain herself, but because I would have liked her to know that someone was curious about her inner life, not just her daily life. I think we do that to the people who take care of us. We see the surface of them, the function of them, and we forget, sometimes for years at a time, that they are also a person who thinks and wonders and carries things. My mother was a full human being with an inner world I never fully saw, and I did not think to be curious about it until she was gone, and I had arrived at my own window at the beginning of the same kind of evenings she had lived through alone. If you still have someone in your life who sits quietly, who seems to have gone somewhere you cannot follow, do not interpret that stillness as absence. They are not absent. They are very likely more fully present than they have ever been, not to the outside world, but to the whole of their own. Sit near them if they will allow it. You do not have to say anything. You do not have to understand. Just let them know with your presence that their inner life is not something to be worried over or hurried through or solved. It is something to be respected. I did not know how to do that for my mother. I am still learning, even now, how to do it for myself. The light is going soft again outside. The street is quieting, and I have nowhere to be and nothing to do, and a whole life sitting here with me, patient as it has always been, waiting to be held.